What's going on, guys? It's G Miners here, and today we are going over how to get a day 1 raid clear. Whether you are going for your first 24-hour emblem or you're looking to improve where your team places on the leaderboards, this video is for you. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of the video, there are 3 major aspects or areas that come into play for each encounter in a raid. First is figuring out raid mechanics. Second will be developing a strategy to complete each mechanic as designed. And then lastly will be executing the strategy properly in order to move on to the next encounter. My team started doing day 1 raids in Beyond Light. For DSC, our first run, we got 47th place. And for VOG, even though we didn't take it as seriously because it was remastered, we were still able to get 163rd. Okay, so let's start with figuring out mechanics. This sounds simple, just play the game and figure out what to do. But most people, even top teams, will overcomplicate mechanics and start assuming what to do rather than figuring it out. When it comes to figuring out mechanics, the best thing that your team can do is hold certain mechanics or variables constant and then play with one thing until you figure out what that one thing does. By approaching the encounter this way, there will be a lot less chaos. It may feel like you are going slower at first, but the goal for each attempt of the encounter should be to learn something rather than to make quick progress. You can learn what something does or does not do, and you can also start to understand what mechanics will wipe you and your team based on interactions or timing. For day 1 Deepstone, my team didn't know what to do with the scanner augment during the first encounter. The raid had just started, so most teams at this point had no clue what to do. We knew that the operator augment opened doors by shooting panels, and that more of these panels were in the lower level of the arena. After a bit of experimenting, we knew that some of these panels would kill you when shot and others would not. We figured we needed the scanner augment in the basement to see what to shoot based on the name and the fact that we were not using it yet. One run, we tried bringing the scanner down with the operator, which didn't work. The next run, we passed scanner down through the terminals, which wiped us because we took too long to complete the encounter's mechanics. Eventually, we figured out what to do, but what I'm getting at is that we were able to eliminate 2 different methods of using the scanner augment just by trying something different and failing the encounter. Using this method is the best way to learn mechanics on your own. The TLDR for this is hold variables constant, see what actually happens in the encounter, and work around this, not around what you think is going to happen. All that being said, no matter how smart of a team you have or how efficient you are at testing mechanics, there is no chance that your team will be able to completely figure out every mechanic for each encounter for a brand new raid. So what you will need to do is utilize the information that other teams figure out. As you raid on day 1, you should also be watching the streams of top teams. You can do this on another laptop, tablet, monitor, or phone, and in most cases, you don't need audio. Many of the larger streamers for Destiny have people in their chat relaying them information throughout the entire raid race. As soon as one team figures out a mechanic that most people have been stuck on, those who are watching will hop into other streams and explain what to do. By watching teams like Redeem, Math Class, Tier 1, and more, you will give yourself the biggest advantage possible and should be able to see these teams doing mechanics properly. This is not scummy to do or cheating by any means. Every team does this in one form or another that is competitive with their placements. Some other smaller things to pay attention to are things on your screen which may allude towards a mechanic or how it works. Text pop-ups during the encounter can be useful to let you know when something is happening or needs to be done. A perfect example is when the Sentinel servitors block the augmentation terminal in Deepstone Crypt. When your team wipes, you can also look at columns on the stat screen. This can showcase certain mechanics that will need to be done, like killing certain enemies or interacting with things in the encounter. Even paying attention to the names of majors or ultras can help give you an understanding as to what that enemy type may do or what a mechanic might involve. As soon as you hop into the raid, start by figuring things out yourself and look to streams for help when you need it or if you notice you are falling behind, and you should be good. Before I go over the rest of the aspects for getting a day 1 clear, if you find this video useful, don't forget to drop a like and sub down below. Subbing helps me out a ton, it is completely free, and you can always change your mind later. The second aspect of raiding on day one that I mentioned was developing strats to use which allow you to complete mechanics properly. In most cases, an encounter comes down to a DPS strat or an ad clear strat. But before I cover how to handle each of these encounters, I wanted to talk about callouts. Communication is a huge part of being an efficient team and placing well on day one. With new mechanics comes new callouts and the need to communicate information to your team. Callouts generally fall under two categories, which are directional callouts and numerical callouts. Directional callouts are always better to use, in my opinion, if they are a viable option. People will understand directions faster than they can learn a set of numbered callouts. That being said, numbers are going to be much better when callouts are not easily describable. In the case when you are calling anything out that is bigger than a 3x3 area or grid, numbered callouts are the way to go. For example, Vogue oracles for Atheon are a 2x3 set, which makes directional callouts easy to use. There are 2 rows and 3 columns, going from close left to far right. Riven's eyes, on the other hand, are almost 10 different callouts in a row. This would be insane to call out directionally and wouldn't fit in a 3x3 area that I described. This is why the callouts for Riven's eyes are right and left, 1 through 5. Yes, right and left are directional, but the main callouts are numbered due to the complexity. Hopefully this makes sense. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it can really help simplify your team's communication on day one. For boss or DPS-based encounters where your loadout revolves around dealing damage, it is important to recognize the type of DPS you are dealing. Optimal DPS can be thought of as a spectrum. At one end, you have burst DPS, and at the other, you have sustained DPS. 2 bosses to compare would be Atrax 1 from Deepstone and Morgeth from Last Wish. Atrax has roughly a 5-second window for DPS. Your best bet for damage on him is to use whatever currently allows you to deal the most damage in the shortest amount of time. Morgeth, on the other hand, has an extremely long damage phase. Even though you want to always have high DPS, some options have high damage rates at the cost of their total damage outputs. For Morgeth, because there is more time to deal damage, sustained options are going to be much better. In general, sustained options will deal more total damage at the cost of the rate at which damage is dealt. Another huge thing to take into account for boss encounters is to develop your strat around getting to damage phases. Too many teams use the best DPS heavies and specials they can and then end up wiping because they are trying to save all their ammo for a DPS phase. In my opinion, it is much better to consistently get to a damage phase and struggle a bit with damage than it is to struggle to even get to a damage phase just for a slightly better damage output. If ammo is a problem for boss encounters, run Special Finisher and Heavy if it becomes available. On top of this, for most damage phases, you will need 1 well, 1 bubble, and maybe a tether. That leaves 3 potential supers to damage with or ad clear to help making reach boss phases easier. When it comes to ad clearing, I mentioned this in a previous video, but I always recommend trying to chain wells of radiance before using other strats. Well chaining is extremely overpowered in underlight activities and is completely self-sufficient with just 2 people if done right. In ad clear encounters where your team is spread out and you can't chain, there isn't any advice that I can really give to teams other than use what works and stay alive. One thing I will say is that managing your level of aggression when playing is super important. Playing too aggressive will help clear ads, but will lead to deaths for yourself. Playing too passive will keep you alive, but will swarm your teammates with ads and then lead to their deaths. Managing how aggressive you play is once again super important for ad clear encounters. The last aspect I mentioned is executing the strats you develop properly. The main issue you are going to run into after learning each mechanic and developing a strat is that something will go wrong. Timing for something may be impossible, your loadout might not deal enough DPS, or a certain player's role is way too hard to do under light by themselves. In these cases, you need to adjust your strategies. My team thought we had figured out how to do Atrax on day 1, but realized later that the damage you did during each phase was not limited. Originally, we thought you just needed to do enough damage to stun him, but eventually wiped from a lack of damage output. When we realized this mistake, our entire loadout, damage strategy, and subclasses changed so that we could increase our burst DPS. By the way, we figured out we were doing this encounter wrong by watching someone else do it on stream while we were in the middle of a run. After any adjustments have been made, getting a good run comes down to keeping energy high, even after failing, and most importantly, avoiding stupid deaths. I have my entire day 1 DSC run up on my channel, and if you go back and watch why we fail encounters after learning all the mechanics, it's almost always due to a dumb death that could have been avoided. One death often snowballs into multiple deaths, and when dying early, it removes the option to make a mistake later on. If you get all of these parts of the raid down and really just keep things simple, getting a day 1 clear is going to become a joke. Once you get used to playing in the endgame and for day 1 raids, the hard part becomes placing amongst the top teams that have a ton of experience. This video definitely has a lot to unpack, and I hope that I covered everything and made it as simple as possible. Hit me with all the questions you guys may have. I'm always happy to help answer any questions. If you want to get a day 1 clear or even place better, let me know. Anyways, that's all for this video. Peace.